Hello, Rick here again. So with Star Trek Discovery flinging the crew into the far future, the year 3187, I thought it prudent to look at what setup that time period has been given by prior shows. Now, as time travel is heavily involved, none of these events are firmly established, as Trek's approach to the future has been to play it as what-if scenarios until they actually have a show set in that time period. That, and for story purposes, they both use altered history and parallel timelines. Nonetheless, without going into rampant speculation on what exactly the burn is, I'm liking the Omega idea personally, or the other points from the trailer, let's take a look at what little primary canon and memory beta content places in the lead up to the 32nd century. In 2554, it's the early temporal Cold War. A war that honestly wasn't very cold, although with temporal mechanics it's all relevant, isn't it? Is it still a Cold War when the focused upon weapon can erase you from existence? Well, by comparison, an all-out phaser skirmish seems tame. Anyway, this was the Battle of Procyon 5, a key Federation victory. The temporal Cold War is a difficult one to track, as it was basically several agencies from a multitude of political entities all trying to deploy time travel to alter history to better suit themselves, while the temporal agencies of Starfleet firmly tried to prevent that. Many other powers also had agreed it was best to leave time alone for fear of unintentional repercussions or reprisal, but not everyone got the message. One such species were the Sphere Builders, whose machinations led the Xindi astray and created the Expanse region of the Alpha Quadrant. The conflicts would continue for centuries to come, but it was from the 26th century the Sphere Builders were supplying their Xindi front in 2153. There's also the uncreated Final Frontier animated show that never came to be, which was to depict the Federation in a much darker tone due to an Omega molecule attack where Starfleet had become more isolationist, although as mentioned, this is all unused material that was from a scrapped project. Around the mid-27th century, the micro-brains of Velara 3 re-established contact with the UFP. Also in this time, a scientist named Caldono creates a very powerful weapon that can halt all nuclear fusion within a star. This time traveller jumps back to Risa in order to hide it, where it is eventually rediscovered by Captain Picard. There are also records of a USS Wells timeship in use by the Federation, so according to the live show, that was the thing, there was still a Starfleet at the time. It was during the 28th century that we see the re-emergence of the effects of the temporal Cold War. The Suliban Cabal's shadowy benefactor was operating from this time, although he only had the technology to project himself back in time, not full-on time travel, which seems really inferior when compared to the other powers of the era, like Starfleet or the Sphere Builders from even centuries before. We also have records that the Temporal Accords were still in place by 2769, as Federation scientists were studying ancient Egypt incognito and following all of the correct procedures under observation by Daniel's organisation. Oh, more on him coming up. This was under the umbrella of the Galactic Union, an alliance of the UFP, Klingons, Romulans and many other species. However, aside from this time travel war, we have recent Trek introducing its fixation with AI, and apparently a malevolent being, probably the Control AI, existed at this time, converting one of Discovery's probes and firing it back. This timeline might well now be aborted, as Control's efforts in 2257 have been thwarted. I'm rhyming a lot in this, aren't I? It's not intentional. During the 29th century, we still have the Federation and Starfleet in operation, but one that is much more comfortable with time travel. It's from here that the USS Relativity and Aeon were seen originating from, the latter of which fell back to Earth in 1967 and sparked a boom in technology that went on to be recorded as human history, and too ingrained in the timeline of the galaxy to be, quote, fixed. However, in the 29th century, Time Fleet was alerted to this by the Aeon emerging in 2873 and blowing up the Sol system from 1996, so that part was fixed. But again, the temporal Cold War rears its head, and we have the emergence of another faction species, the Nakul. This was their native time zone before jumping back to World War II era Earth. The 30th century sees not too much going on, which I guess is a good thing. The 31st century is where Agent Daniels is born. We visit this era once when Daniels accidentally screws up by bringing Captain Archer to 3052, creating a completely altered history from 2152 onwards, but then fixed. As the ruins we see are a complete mess, all we have to go on from this canon depiction of this time is Daniels and his equipment. So it seems that although fashion senses were lost, the ability to time travel without a ship was commonplace, as well as casual temporal observation. Suffice to say, this was the most advanced state we've ever seen mankind reach in Star Trek. In 3074, we have the Voyager episode Living Witness, where these ships' backup EMH is reactivated by the Kyrians and the Vascons in the Delta Quadrant, who have a whole museum dedicated to the impact the USS Voyager had on the Delta Quadrant. We are unlikely to be visiting this far away from the established Milky Way, so I doubt we'll see anything like this. As for the 32nd century, well, all we know is that Daniels' agency was collecting information from this time period. Burnham's mother's Red Angel Daedalus suit bungeed her between this time and others of her choosing, but she was never able to return to her home era. In her time period, things had been wrecked by Control, however, so with Discovery seemingly preventing, or at least delaying that issue, this element of the future may now be wiped from reality. Again, depends on what sort of time travel the writers want to utilise. So aside from what has been revealed in the trailer, the only really core issue that it would be hard to hand-wave away would be the existence of the temporal Cold War. So whatever happened must have occurred post-Daniels, post-Time Agency, and be something they either didn't foresee or knowingly didn't interfere with. As Trek Central pointed out, one of the main characters native to this era, Booker, was born into a post-burn galaxy, so it has to have occurred before he was born. We also know that Starfleet and the Federation is still around, but very much diminished and trying to survive after this event. But it was stressed that the issues that the UFP is facing were not from within this time. So there we go. A quick breakdown of the admittedly fluid timeline leading up to the 32nd century, where Discovery Season 3 is basing itself. Can you think of anything else that may resurface to face the crew of Discovery? Personally, and I'm just spitballing here, Trill symbiotes in Memory Beta canon can live well into their thousands. So thanks for watching this recap, and I'll see you in the future. So long, and goodbye.